Welcome back, viewers. Today we're going to react and rebut some out-of-pocket atheist comments. And these are some funny arguments from atheists that at first sound really ridiculous.
Idiot!
But then after you hear them explain, like, oh yeah, that's not a crazy argument, I see what they're getting at. So they're actually pretty solid and worth talking about. So without any further ado, let's do it.
I want to propose something that might sound a little strange at first, which is that the biggest problem for theism here is not, famously, the great, intense sufferings of the world, like holocausts or earthquakes, but rather menial, less significant suffering, like being caught out in the rain, or stubbing your toe, or tripping over a curb on the street. Why? This seems a tad absurd, I'll grant you that, but consider this. When we experience a great suffering, like the death of a loved one, or a devastating earthquake, or indeed a holocaust, it's easy to imagine that this might somehow be part of a grand plan. The depth of our suffering may make us into better people. The people who die may be experiencing a much happier state of affairs in the afterlife now. Perhaps by allowing the Jewish Holocaust to take place, God makes it such that we are far less likely to allow even worse projects of genocide to occur in the future. But what could possibly be served? What possible end could be served? What possible meaning could there be in stubbing your toe, or tripping over a curb, or having a pigeon use your new suit as a restroom? Such instances are not significant. They're usually forgotten within a day or two, and therefore do not and cannot develop the soul. Nor do they seem plausibly part of some grand design or plan. They seem, that is to say, meaningless.
I am a big fan of Alex O'Connor, by the way. I met him in a hotel in Atlanta. He's a really honest, down-to-earth, cool guy. And at first you hear his argument and he's like, the biggest problem for theism is stubbing your toe, and that's what I put in the thumbnail. And it's like, that's silly. But then you kind of heard Alex's rationale and you're like, oh, he's kind of making a good argument there. However, his argument about stubbing your toe is a repackaging and a different angle of looking at probably the oldest objection to Christianity in the history of the church: the problem of pain. Most people would be a lot more influenced by a question of really dramatic pain, like the sudden unexpected death of a loved one, unnecessary torture, or a great war. Those things would raise the question of the problem of pain a lot more for some people than stubbing your toe, because you're more likely than not just going to forget the last time you stubbed your toe. But from Alex's point of view, he's saying that he can actually see how theoretically a greater good could be brought out of something like, for his example was the Holocaust, because now humans are so shocked by that evil event that it's hopefully never going to happen again. But what he can't see a greater good coming out of is just menial pain, like stubbing your toe, a bird crapping on your nice new shirt. And it's kind of the opposite of this Family Guy joke. Check it out.
Sucks even worse than when I stub my toe. Ah! Why does everything bad always happen to me? Answer me, guy in box and guy on cross.
Now, if God exists, grant that God exists, if you will, and exists as the Christians describe him, as omnipotent and benevolent, is it possible that God could bring about a greater good out of stubbing your toe?
Yeah.
Of course he can. And again, Alex isn't asking a question about whether or not he exists, he's asking a question about the goodness of God. That's why I'm not arguing for God's existence, I'm responding to his question. In the instance of stubbing your toe, for example, it's feasible that the greater good could be strengthening your bones, or helping teach your mind to walk more cautiously and avoid certain steps or paths. But the fact that I could come up with a potential way that a greater good could come out of stubbing your toe isn't really the point, because there's a lot of those menial things that I probably couldn't come up with a response for. The point is that God can and will bring a greater good out of all pain. But in almost all cases, we can't see the greater good coming out of a piece of pain, especially not in real time. Sometimes in the future we can see it, but even in the future sometimes we can't see it. And that's where faith comes in. A common straw man of Christianity is that faith is all about believing something without evidence, and sometimes people who take that perspective are getting it from Hebrews chapter 11. Faith is the assurance of things things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. But if you're still getting the idea that Hebrews 11 is saying you should believe things without evidence, I would recommend just reading the rest of the chapter for context. And the rest of the chapter is about a bunch of Old Testament examples of people with faith. And it's about those figures seeing things from afar and trusting God to deliver on them. So faith in a Christian sense is a rational trust in God. And all that is to say, in a very short pointed sentence, God can and will bring a greater good out of pain, small or large. And I know this because I have faith. And I know that obviously leads to the next question of can you thus prove God's existence, which just wasn't the question that Alex was addressing in the video. And so I didn't argue for it because it wasn't the subject. But that is a good question, and there are other videos about it. Check them out.
God that our neighbors believe in is essentially an invisible person. It's a creator deity who created the universe to have a relationship with one species of primate. Lucky us. and he's got galaxy upon galaxy to attend to, but he's especially concerned with what we do, and he's especially concerned with what we do while naked.
Sam Harris is obviously being a little bit humorous here. Think about it a little bit more like, oh, that's kind of a good argument. Why does God care what I do when I'm buck naked? Why would he care? Like Sam Harris said, all these galaxies in the universe to attend to. The universe is a big place, and he's got a lot to look after. Why does he care about that? The way I'm interested in approaching that question, however, is by reversing the question. So let's ask, why would God not care about that? Why would he not care about the color shirt that I chose to wear today? Or why would he not care about the outcome of the upcoming football game? And so this kind of inspires me to share this clip from a Christian movie called Facing the Giants.
I think that football is just one of the tools we use to honor God.
So you think God does care about football?
I think he cares about your faith. He cares about where your heart is. If you can live your faith out on the football field, then yes, God cares about football because he cares about you. He sent his son Jesus to die for us so we could live for him. That's why we're here.
I could have said it better than Coach does in the video. God cares about football because he cares about you. And football is something that you're doing. Which doesn't mean that he's going to win the game for you. Much more likely than not, he's going to have you lose to have you learn something from that. But for God not to care about something, not to care about the color of my shirt, not to care about the football game, not to care about what we're doing when we're buck naked, would be for him to not be omnipotent or benevolent. Because if God didn't know the best outcome, he would be impartial. But God always knows the best outcome. And so he's always going to know which one should be done and which one shouldn't. So again, if God exists as the Christians define him, God cares just as much about the football game as he does about your sex life or anything else at all.
But this, to me, is the true horror of religion. Okay, it allows perfectly decent and sane people to believe by the billions what only lunatics could believe on their own. Okay, if you wake up tomorrow morning thinking that saying a few Latin words over your pancakes is going to turn them into the body of Elvis Presley, okay, you have lost your mind. Okay? But if you think more or less the same thing about a cracker and the body of Jesus, you're just a Catholic.
This is another example of Sam making a good argument and packaging some humor along with it. But for context, the topic of this debate that Sam Harris was participating in was about morality and whether the foundations of morality are natural or supernatural. And Sam argues that the belief that morality is grounded in the supernatural, or specifically God, leads to what seems like a really wacky belief, like the idea that Christ is present in the Eucharist. And I think he's kind of right. If God doesn't exist, that's probably the craziest and weirdest idea of any religion ever. But my response would be that the presence of Christ in the Eucharist is a theological question that not all Christians agree on. A lot of Christians agree that Christ is present, but don't agree on how. Now, if we had flipped the tables and Sam Harris's opponent, who happened to be William Lane Craig in this debate, if he came to the debate and started arguing that God exists because of communion theology, we would be a little bit confused. Which is why I think it's a totally rational question for Sam to be curious about, but I think it's also a little bit off topic for that particular debate. And theological questions, specifically Eucharistic questions, aren't the kind of questions that I'm going to try and prove to someone who doesn't believe that God exists. And I'm going to start by saying that Jesus offers you something atheism certainly cannot offer, and that's the forgiveness of sins. So if you enjoyed the video, consider becoming a member of the channel. We've got like this many new members videos only for members. We've got a fun new Discord channel where the other day we were talking about young earth versus old earth and that being compatible with Christianity. I even tossed out some of the ideas for this video to a few of my members. And bye!